What's up, guys? Let's talk about Minetest. At this time in our course, I need to take a second to leave the textbook and then come back. So far they are introducing concepts that apply to that are applicable, and that's fine and good, and it's important to understand those topics, but the thing that it lacks is reference. So we're gonna be getting into stacks and inventories, things like that. And so, but what you'll notice is when we get in, they give you some code, but there's kind of this vagueness about where you're supposed to put that code. And I'd like to have kind of a foundation or a point of reference to say, okay, I see the information that you're giving me, and I see how possibly I could use this in my own mod. And so, although I'm not going to be able to do this perfectly, we're going to try something to give you some point of reference. So for context, here we're talking about stacks and getting a stack and maybe counting it and then maybe changing a stack. And of course, the term stack you're probably not familiar with. It's just, you know stacks in your inventory, right? So the question is, well, where do I actually do those things? And you can think about this like as a kind of a dynamic script. Maybe it's better said. When you load Minetest, your mod gets run, and that's the only time that it gets run, unless, as I introduced previously, there's a callback. And in the callback, if you punch a node, it will run some script. So that would be a place that you could put information like this. But of course, if you're punching a node, what does that have to do with inventories? So there's somewhere in your code that it makes sense to put when you're to check an inventory and things like that. So this brought me to the idea of stepping through how other people have written their mods for several different reasons. One reason is that you can have an idea of maybe what a mod looks like, where to do exactly what. Just completely lost my train of thought. I had to take a phone call. So I'm going to continue in the direction I think we should go. Basically, let's head on over to quit the chit chatter, and let's head over to something called to a mod called Furnace. Right? We're all familiar with Furnace. We know how it works. We also know that when you are in the game, there's some sort of dynamic. You can put stuff into the furnace. You can take stuff out of the furnace. And this ties heavily into inventory and like having inventory and stacks in an object. So this will be very helpful later on. And we find Furnace in our default mod. So this is just with every single installation of Minetest, it comes with this. But before we get into the Furnace although it might be tempting to just jump into Furnace.lua, we want to take a second and understand how they've even written this mod in the first place. Like clearly, you can see there's a lot more going on here than our simple my mod. So why is there so much? This can be very overwhelming. Well, let me break this down for you as best as I can. First of all, let's establish a reference point. We have here init.lua, so we're familiar with that, right? That's a critical component to any mod. We also have mod.config. We're semi-familiar with that. We know we've added it at the beginning. We haven't messed with it since, but it's there. Then we also have textures. Okay, good. Great. We've got some of the foundation. We get the three things that we are familiar with. So it does have those things, so it's not out crazy and weird, missing key pieces that we know are necessary, right? So, of course, textures, we look in there, and man, they've got a lot of textures. Very interesting. Mod.config, I'm not going to open it up. You can look at it if you want. But let's open up init.lua. And why are we opening up init.lua? Because it is run it's the first thing that is run in a mod. Minetest looks for init.lua, gets it, opens it up. And what does it see? Well, it sees all of this in here. And let me explain what all of this is. First of all, we're creating a local variable that's doing something here using it has to do with languages. Don't worry about it. We don't need to think a single second longer about that. Well, default.getTranslator, whatever. We're establishing some sort of global default for light. Self-explanatory. Oh, if you need any help, it's very nice when the authors have included these comments, because that certainly gives us direction, insight. So, and then we get into graphical user interface related stuff. And so this is just basically going to pop up a display something on the screen of a user and give them, let's see, it looks like a background color, list colors, so just various different things. It gets the player's name and it assigns it to some local variable name, and yada yada yada. We are going to skip over this, but it's interesting to look at, and maybe you can figure out what's going on. And we also look at the hotbar, which I think, I'm not sure exactly what the hotbar is. I know what the HUD bar is. But so that's doing something with, again, the user interface, it seems like. Here we have the graphical user interface survival forum, and yada, yada, yada. Okay. Now, we get down here to a very important piece that you've got to pay attention to. So here we have defined a local variable called default path. So it's local. It's just in this mod. It's called default path. What's it doing? It's got minetest.getModPathDefault. What is that? What is this function doing? Well, it's fairly self-explanatory. You may understand right now, but let me just explain briefly. When you install Minetest, some people put it in the downloads folder. Some people put it at the root C portion of your drive. It can end up in a lot of different places. And so the location of your mod will change depending on where the person decides to put that folder. So the code has to be flexible and allow for those changes. And that's where getModPath comes in. It finds the exact location of that mod. And in this case, it's specifying which mod it cares about. And that is default. So we see that in my case, it is located here, denoted in the URL bar. And I've copied that and I've pasted it over here for you to see. So we see default, but then we've got a lot of other stuff here, a lot of other stuff that is you can change. And that is the portion that getModPath takes care of. It finds it and everything is good in the world. So at the end of the day, default underscore path is this right here. It is that. And it takes us to this folder here, which has a bunch of stuff in it. Now the next thing that the script does is it goes down here and it says do file. Well, that's again fairly self-explanatory. Do file means that it's going to get a file and execute the file. And which file, you might ask? Well, default path, as we have established, is that text that I copied and provided for you to see. And then we've got a concatenator, which means that it's going to take some text and it's going to slap it on to the default path, and that's going to become one solid string. And so what you end up with is that, well, you get it. Over here in our, to visualize, over here in our folder, we have the functions script, the functions Lua script. And so what it will do is it'll actually run the entire script. It'll take that, open it up, however it does that. Confounded phones. So functions might be a good thing to look at. Let's open up Notepad++ and just kind of take a stroll. it's easy to get overwhelmed by a function because somebody has taken a lot of time to carefully create it. And so what I would suggest is briefly go through and just minimize, if you have Notepad++, minimize all of these things so that it's a little bit easier to get the big picture. And there you have it, 696 lines. Wow. So in the functions, naturally, you would expect to see functions, and that's indeed. They're defining a bunch of functions. Here we have something that it falls underneath the default global variable and has a name node_sound_defaults. Again, node_sound_stone_defaults, and so on. These are all functions which accept a table and do something. We're not going to worry about what that something is. We know, though, that it's dealing with sound. Now, we get into default.coolLava, which must be a function somewhere defined. Oh, no, I guess they're defining it in a different way. Instead of writing function first, it's kind of coming afterwards. That's fine. It works the same, I think. And so this is dealing with lava cooling. Now we have here an if statement, and it's going to be testing something, and it looks like it's trying to jive with the Minetest settings. It's an issue with settings. Okay, so on and so forth. We are dealing with a lot of functions here. There's some other stuff that I'm sure is very interesting and important, but for the most part, it's just functions. We now know that if there's a functions reference in any preceding files, then more than likely that is where it's located, and we can get more information about that function there. So let's skip on down past trees, nodes, chests to furnace.lua. So we know here on line 60, the Minetest will be executing the Furnace.Lua script. So where is that? Well, it's in the same folder, and it's located right here. We're going to right-click, open it up, and take a peek around here. Okay, I've collapsed everything down, and you can see we've got some functions being created. But now these are local functions, which means that these are not accessible, I think, even outside of this script. So the default mod doesn't even access these, only the furnace.lua. So that's that's something that's important to note. The other thing is, yes, we have found a happy place, something that we're familiar with, right? Minetest.register_node. Now this is where we are going to end. We've kind of caught up. We've gone through some of the basics of what the default has done, and we have arrived at what we have done basically. And so so take a look around. Take a look at this section of furnaces, and what I want you to do, remember, we are trying to figure out at what point or where you define code that's run later on in the game. And so we are familiar with register_node. So what I want you to do is get into register_node, these definitions. You'll notice that you may notice something about these two, and there might be, I'm not going to give it to you, but there's a reason why they've defined two different nodes, one that's furnace and one that's furnace_active. Okay, think through that, and you don't have to answer me, but just think through that. But what I want you to do is get into these functions, these registrations, right? And tell me, where have they put the dynamic code? Take one section, take one of those sections where it is code written or executed when you interact with a furnace, when you interact with it, and explain to me what that section does. And so what I want to know is, what is the action which would prompt, what is the action that would prompt this script to be run? And then secondly, what does this script even do? what would happen if you were to perform these actions with the furnace. What is the script, and what does it do, if that makes sense. So that's what I'd like you guys to do. And then we'll continue. I think we'll probably continue a little bit longer on this trajectory of understanding how other mods are written. Thanks for watching, guys.